Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the SD.RB podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the new web service Outlandish and how we handle dynamic domains. Okay, my name's Chris Abad. I am co-founder of Integral Impressions. Integral Impressions is an internet advertising firm located here in San Diego. I think we're 9 people large, been around for the past 2.5 years. Traditionally, we've always done search marketing, email marketing, advertising services. We recently launched our first product, Outlandish, which is what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. Let's see. I'll take you guys through a few things. First of all, I want to explain to you a little bit about Outlandish. I won't get into like a demo or anything because you're not really the target market. If anyone wants to learn more about it, I can either talk about it more next time about what it actually does, or you can find me later. But I'll just kind of go through just so you guys have, you guys at least understand the context of some of the stuff that I'm talking about. I'll talk about some of the craziness that we went through right before launching and how smooth or not smooth that went, depending on how you look at it. And then I want to get into a little bit more specifics on some of the functionality. There's one specific piece of functionality that I just talked about today. It's how we handled some of our dynamic domains that we allow our users to use. Okay, so what is Outlandish? Outlandish is really, it's all about landing pages. For you guys who aren't familiar with the concept of landing pages, crash course in landing pages, it's really an advertising thing. It's a targeted landing page has content that's very specific to your marketing campaign. So it's a destination mini site, I guess. It's usually only a single page, but the content is very specific to the advertising campaign that actually drives the traffic there. So the goal of Outlandish is really two things. It's one, to allow people to rapidly deploy new landing pages very, very easily so that you're more inclined to do more landing pages for more campaigns. And the other item is really giving you a global overview of your ROI. It's a marketing tool to allow you to manage your ad spend so you can see where you're being effective in those advertising dollars. So why did we build Outlandish? You guys probably hear this here and there by a lot of companies out there that build websites, but it's really different when you actually do it. I mean, it's one thing just to hear it, just like a lot of the other stuff that you hear. It's really different when you actually sit down and do it. And we really built Outlandish for ourselves. Like I said, for the past 2.5 years, we've been a service firm. So we were doing a lot of these advertising campaigns that we needed these landing pages for, and our landing pages have always been one-off custom development builds that we would do for our clients. And when you're doing it right and you have a lot of landing pages, the management gets to be a pain, and really the functionality and the concept of a landing page is so simple that building something like this really cut down the development time and made it not only easy for us, which was the primary goal, but also easy for our clients. And for any of you guys that are in a position like this, one of the nice things about building an application for yourself first is if it doesn't work, there's still value in what you built. If no one else wants to use it, if it doesn't help anyone else, that's really just the bonus. The number one goal is build it to help yourself. And that's exactly what we did. And the secondary reason why we built Outlandish is there was a gaping hole in the industry, which is another thing that this is kind of, I guess, the business side of the web application stuff. There really wasn't anything out there that we felt did this. I mean, we needed it for ourselves and we had to build it because no one else was doing it. There's a ton of vendors out there that deal with the advertising side, dealing with the actual traffic, or not necessarily internet traffic, but I mean, it could be print advertising or anything that would go to a landing page. There's a lot of people out there that did that, and there was a lot of content providers, people that had value products that would go behind the landing page. What the person's looking for and why they go to your landing page, they're looking for what's behind it, the content, and there was a lot of people that did that. There really wasn't anyone in the middle that was acting as a gateway to get our clients the contact information for the lead that they needed. Is there anyone have any questions about any of the stuff I'm talking about so far? Because it's kind of like a lot of advertising stuff, and this is just second nature to me, and I'm trying to get to the programming stuff as fast as possible. But some of this stuff probably will help what I'm going to show you make more sense. No question. Cool. Me? 20. 23. All right. Next. Under the hood, this is some of the stuff that we don't necessarily share with clients because they could care less, but for you guys, maybe more. We're running on a single dedicated server. The single dedicated server is actually, it's not dedicated in the sense that it's dedicated to the application. It's dedicated in the sense that we're running what you call a dedicated server, but we're sharing it with our other Rails applications as well. So we're running it side by side, which this might make more sense when I show you the dynamic domain stuff, but made it a little bit more interesting when it came to handling dynamic domains on a server that's also sharing domains with other sites running on it. We are using Capistrano for deployment. I'm a hardcore Capistrano fan. Now, this was actually my first project where I really started exploring Capistrano, and it makes deployment so much easier. I mean, you can... all I can say is you guys try it. I mean, I'm not going to get into Capistrano right here. That might be another talk. But I highly recommend it. We're running Lydie FCGI. The application itself right now is running 5 FCGI processes. We're exploring Apache and Mongrel. But for right now, I mean, the thing's running perfectly fine. No problems at all. It's running pretty much as fast as we could hope, even with the other applications running on the server with Lydie and FCGI. MySQL for the database. When I checked last night, we had a little over 50 users. Let's see, when did we launch this thing? Last week was the launch, the official launch of the application. I'll get into a little bit more about the process before launch, but we're currently at 50 users. I think maybe half to 3/4 of those are actually paying users. The other whatever's left are people that we're giving free accounts for one reason or another. Either they're members of the press, top-level executives that companies we're looking to partner with, or they're just someone that we're talking to that wants to see a little bit more about the application. All right, so beta to 1.0 in 4.2 seconds. And we got into a little bit of an interesting situation with the timelines, and this is something that I want to talk about. I don't expect every project to be like this, but this was our personal experience, and it had some very positive challenges associated with these timelines. Okay, so let me explain to you guys exactly what I'm talking about. What happened was, like I said, we launched last week. We launched at a trade show. Was our big target goal was to have this application ready for this big trade show. One thing I didn't mention is that this application is specifically for the real estate industry. Both myself and the other founder have probably 5-6 years of dealing with web applications in the real estate industry. So while the concept of this application is very universal and can be used for almost any vertical, we really focus on the real estate industry because it gave us a big head start in knowing what to build for and how to speak to the clients. So if you hear me mention anything about real estate, that's why. So this convention was a real estate convention. About 5 to 6 weeks ago, we knew we were going to build this application. We've known for probably about a year, but we just never really got around to it. We had just a lot of custom client work, and we just got too busy. And then the show was coming up, and this show is probably the most techie show out of the real estate industry. And we said, if we're going to do this, we need to launch at the show. I thought the show was in October. So I was like, sure, no problem, we can do that. My partner calls me about 5-6 weeks ago and says, oh, no, the show we're going to do it at is not the one in October, it's the one in July. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, so we got to build this product in 4 weeks? And that's really what it came down to. So a huge testament to Rails. I mean, it was myself and one other guy, and we essentially had to build this thing, test it, get some beta users on it, and make sure it was solid by the show. And we had about 4 weeks, and then an extra week in there just to really make sure nothing was going to break. So some of the very interesting challenges that created was number one. I put on there embracing your limitations because initially, I mean, the 4-week development schedule really was a limitation, but what it forced us to do, I mean, we've been dwelling on what we're going to do for this product for the past year. So as you go through, I mean, you're not building anything. It's so easy to just come up with these ideas, write them down, and say, oh yeah, I want it to do that, I want it to do that. We really had to whittle down the functionality of the application. I basically had to sit down and say, okay, I've got 4 weeks. I can only do, I only need it to do what it needs to do and nothing else. So if it can do without it and not be broken, then it was out. So it really whittled it down to the bare necessities. And as much as you guys hear this, I mean, really it amounted to less being more, and quality over quantity. What it allowed us to do was really focus on a very solid core set of features and not overextend ourselves. And even though it was only a 4-week development schedule, it was very comfortable because we created very realistic guidelines for ourselves as far as what we actually wanted it to do. And it ended up being a very simple, very solid product that allowed us to build from a very solid base of functionality. Okay, so pretty much the way it went is, let me see. So I think we gave ourselves about 3 weeks of just throw yourself in a hole and just develop. Don't look up, just develop and get something that you can actually put up on the web and it'll work. So that was the first week, 3 weeks of just intense development. Didn't involve user feedback or usability testing or anything like that. It was just get the basic feature set out there. From week 4 to week 5 is where we put it out there and we started getting users on it. We actually had queued up maybe about 10 to 20 users that were going to be our beta testers. One advantage I had is we have a very good sales team. So our sales team was able to, while we were doing 3 weeks of development, they were able to queue up clients who were willing to say, yeah, I want to do that. It's not ready yet, but as soon as it is, throw me on there. So as soon as it was ready, as soon as we had it up on the servers, I already had 10, 15 people that I could go and put on the system and see what happened. So, and really, this is another point that I want to say I'm a big fan of now, is getting your application out there as quickly as possible and get users on it, because you learn so much more and you start seeing things that you're not going to see using it yourself once users are on it. Not just customers, but even other people in your company, or if you're doing it personally, other friends will just see things that you'll never catch. So the quicker you get it out there, the quicker you're able to catch these things and build a solid app. The longer you have this tunnel vision on, the more likely you are to get off track, and by the time you pick your head up, you may be way off in left field. So always use your peers and especially customers as guidance through the development process as much as possible. I guess one thing I can say is that even though we built the thing in 3 weeks, got it out there, and got 10, 15 people on as fast as possible, and it was a big, let's hold our breath and hope nothing shatters, it went really, really well. We were very pleased that nothing broke, nothing caught on fire. There were a few bug fixes here and there during that last 2 weeks that we had to go through. A few feature adds, very minor things where we're looking at, we're saying, oh, we should be doing that, and we just slipped our minds. But most of those last 2 weeks were just a lot of usability enhancements. I mean, the thing worked. We just needed to make it work better and just add that extra polish. And really what enabled us to do that was just getting real people on it, because as much as you may know your own application because you built it, you're not going to use it the same way your target market is going to use it. And so getting real people on it will reveal a lot of these, they'll go through different workflows than you will. So you'll see these holes that you wouldn't stumble across no matter how many times you use your own application. Okay, so that's kind of a overview of the Outlandish application and our process that we went through from getting it up on the servers up until 1.0, the show where we did our big launch. Did anyone have any questions on any of that? No? Cool. Okay, so this is one thing that one area where I wanted to get into some of the specifics of the application. I sent an email out where I just kind of listed some of the interesting things that I had come across going through and actually building the application. One thing I was talking to Dominic about, who's our other developer. You can read all the blog posts out there you want, all the wikis you want, but you really don't. You pick up on the little things when you actually do it, and especially when you do it in a real world situation. It may make all the sense in the world while you're reading through it, but there are certain things that you just glaze over while you're reading, but will be big roadblocks when you're actually doing it. And those are kind of the interesting things for me to actually go through and solve, because it makes you that much more confident the next time that you have to do it. So one of the pieces of functionality in the application is dynamic domains. Let me see if I have it on here. Okay. Well, I'll explain to you what the dynamic domains are. We're using dynamic domains in two locations. The first is the account login URL, which is you guys have I'm sure seen before. I mean, Campfire does it, Basecamp does it, Fluxium does it, where you have your domain and then your account specific subdomain where you go to log into. So that's one area where we're doing it. And that actually was relatively simple. The login URLs is not difficult at all, and I'll show you guys some code samples of how we did it. Where it became interesting was coupling that with the other area where we're using dynamic domains, which was the landing pages. So the way the application works, I didn't necessarily want to get into a demo or anything, but you have your backend, which is kind of like a basic content management system, and then you have your front end, which is really just a single page, and that's the landing page. So these landing pages can be deployed to any domain name you want, so that in your marketing you then point it to that domain. So we needed to allow our users to quickly and easily set up any domain or any subdomain they wanted to, based on domains that we'd purchased, or bring their own domain to the application and use any of their own domains or subdomains of their domains. So coupling that with the login URLs and how to filter that traffic got a little interesting. I'll start off with the login URLs. So the way our application works is the domain name is Outlandish, and then you'll have your account name .outlandish. So your login URL would be a subdomain of our main application domain. One of the first things, well, this wasn't one of the first things we did, but one of the things that we use and when I read this is kind of what started me down this path of how I should do this, was David Hannemeyer Hansen wrote a plugin called Account Location, which has some basic methods that are helpful when you're dealing with something like this. So this isn't actually the plugin code, but it's very, very similar. Slight modification. Main reason why we changed it is just some of the I think he was using, what was he using? He might have been using like name or login or something like that of the account, where in our situation it just made a lot more sense to use things like subdomain and domain and things like that. But other than that, it's relatively the same. So this isn't really so much, we didn't really use this for the account login URLs themselves to actually be able to log into the system. What this was really used for is mostly in the views. Like when we wanted to tell a user what their login domain was, in the emails where we're sending them their login URL, things like that. So you have things in here like default account subdomain. The default account subdomain will default to what the user's subdomain is, or it'll, that's default account subdomain will grab the account's subdomain. So what you can do is account URL, account host, account domain, and account subdomain. Those are kind of like view helpers is really what we use them for. But what you can do is you can pass those the subdomain, the request subdomain, so that way you can actually grab what's physically in the browser rather than that account's subdomain. So we use that at points to compare between what the account user should have been logged in, what the URL they should have been using, and what URL they were actually using. Okay, so this is where we actually get into the authentication. Basically what we did is we used Access Authenticated, and we just added an additional requirement. Not only did they have to be a user with a valid username and password, but they needed to be using the right URL to be logged in as. So by doing this, it not only allowed us to authenticate both on login, but also allowed us to authenticate throughout the application. So once they were logged in, if they tried to change URLs to use someone else's account URL, it would kick them back out because we were using the before filter on all the controllers. I'll show you guys that here. So, I mean, this is really simple. I stripped out a lot of code from Access Authenticated and just showed you guys what was important. Access Authenticated has the authorize method in here, which just allows you, I believe by default it's blank. There's nothing in there, right? To authorize. Yeah, I mean, there's some comments in there that just say you can use this if you have additional authorization requirements. So that's what we did. We just say that the user account, the account that user account. So we just find the user's account by the domain the subdomain that they're actually using and make sure that matches. So I mean, it's one line of code. Like I said, to do login URLs is super simple, and it's actually one of the reasons why we did it is because normally when you're doing Access Authenticated, you need things like email or login or something like that to be your unique identifier. But this allowed us to actually just have the account domain as a unique identifier, so people using the same email address can have multiple accounts. Imagine Basecamp, where you can have multiple accounts, but you can use the same email address in different accounts. So it allowed us to not require email and login and things like that to be unique because we were coupling that with the login URL they were using. Questions so far? What's that? We have a actually I guess I don't have it on here because I don't have all. This isn't actually live. This is just an image of the code. I don't remember where I found it, but there was a regular expression that I pulled from. I think it might have been from Sean Inman, where he was validating domain names. I think he had to use it for Mint, so we use that. So yeah, it makes sure that what you select for your account name, we have domain names elsewhere too. So anywhere we're using domain names, we're using that regular expression to make sure it's a valid domain name. Yeah. Okay. So like I said, the other area that we coupled with those dynamic login URLs was the landing page URLs. So the landing page URLs are a little bit different, and the screenshot here on the side shows you what you can do with a landing page URL. The login URL, you have fewer options. You can only do a subdomain of Outlandish. The login URLs, you can do a subdomain of one of our domains, and I think we have 4 or 5 that are plugged in there that you can use for your landing pages. Or at the bottom, you can use a custom domain. So let's see. I think I have the code here next. Okay, so a couple things. So the first thing we had to do was we had to set up the routes. Did I put it on here? I did. Okay. So there's a plugin called Request Routing. I think was written by the guy from Fingertips. And basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to use things like domain, subdomain, port, IP address, and all those request parameters as conditional statements in your routes. So that was the first step. Really the first step was to make sure that if you were using the Outlandish domain, we directed you to the application, the main application controller, the account controller. Anything other than that domain, we have a single landing page controller, and we directed you to the landing page controller. So that's really what I'm showing here. Again, I've stripped out anything that's not relevant, but the first thing that we do is under the conditions, if you're using the Outlandish domain, it's using your standard routes, but if you're not using the Outlandish domain, it's directing you to the landing page controller. Okay, so first step was get the traffic where it needed to and be able to segment the traffic properly based on what they were trying to access. Second step was once we directed them to the landing page controller, the landing page controller needed to find out which landing page it needed to display based on the domain name that was being used. So the way that we handled this is we checked for standard subdomains first, if they were using one of our standard subdomains, and if not, we assume they were using a custom domain, then we checked for that. And I'll show you when we get in here, but if none of those worked, if they weren't using one of our standard subdomains and they weren't using a custom domain that was in our database either, we kick them back out to our marketing site so they can check out all our pretty marketing. Yep. It depends on if the 404 is going to happen in the after the domain or within the domain. within the domain. If it's a domain name that's pointing to our servers, so it gets routed through this application. Is that what you're asking? All that gets kicked back out. If it doesn't match any existing account, it gets kicked back out to our product site. I'll show you. I have the code in here. Okay, so I'll walk you guys through this. This is again, this is the landing page controller, again, stripped down to really what's only relevant. So we have a before filter on here to convert domain to campaign. So we basically need to find out what campaign this person is trying to pull up. So the method down here, convert domain to campaign, the first thing that we do is the if request domain. The reason why I had to put that in there is if someone tries to access the server directly using an IP address, it doesn't pull the request domain properly. So we don't want to do any of this. And as you can see at the very bottom, that's the default. If none of this works, at the very end, we're just redirecting them if we didn't find a campaign the whole time. So for example, if they used an IP address, we don't do any of that within the if statement. So at the very end, they get kicked back out. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, it seems like this only works with this controller. I guess you could sort of navigate controller. I guess if you're typing in some kind of action in any controller that doesn't have an action, right? So I'm trying to figure out.
Oh, that's a little bit different. I mean, if you're using a domain that gets you into the application outside of landing page controller, anything 404 will just pull up your 404.html page that's in your public folder. So I've gone in and styled that, make sure that looks pretty. You can. There's rescue in public, I think it is. And so when you're in rescue in public, you can decide what you want to do based on the exception. So you can specifically say if it's a 404 exception, do this. By default, 404 exceptions will render public/404.html. We're doing the same thing with anything that's not, if it's a 404 or record not found, we'll show the 404 page. Anything else will show a 500 page, which is very similar. We've just styled an HTML page. But we also have other things set up like sending us an email. I don't remember the name of the plugin, but there's actually, yeah, exception notifier is what we're using. You know, and this might just be a testament to how well we actually did what we did, but this thing's been running for, I guess, total maybe 2-3 weeks, and I haven't gotten a single email. And I know it works because I've tested it. So it's not like it's broken. It's that nothing's really popped up. I mean, there's been some 404s out there just because people are being stupid, but I mean, nothing's really broken yet. So I'm still kind of holding my breath because I mean it's still kind of a young application, but I've been very pleased with how things have gone so far, considering this is our first commercial application that we've really deployed and used Rails like this. Okay, so like I said, if they're using an IP address, nothing happens, kicks them back out the end. Let's assume they are using a domain name. The first thing that we check for is that they're using one of our subdomains. So the first thing I set up was just some ways to access the subdomain as well, the subdomain that's being used, as well as the complete domain that's being used. One thing that, in some of the www stuff that you're seeing here, one thing that was interesting, and this is an example of you actually have to go through it to pick up on something like this. Usually, I mean, most people will kind of use the domain name or www. The domain name interchangeably, so we needed to support that behavior. So if someone wanted to use a custom domain, let's say my domain, chrisabad.com, I should be able to either type in my custom domain, chrisabad.com, or www.chrisabad.com, and I should be able to access it with chrisabad.com or www.chrisabad.com. So there's a little bit of stuff in here going on to really be able to allow for that type of behavior, because we don't want to act like www is a separate subdomain from just the domain name. Yes, no, actually you can't, because I took that one out of there. This is for the landing page domains, but specifically for the account URLs. And this is another thing I would recommend doing. I mean, there's certain subdomains of your domain that you probably don't want people to take. I think we've taken out of there like www, app, server, MySQL. I mean, some of the standard stuff that you might want to use for back-end purposes, we've taken out of what's available to use as an account name. So yeah, I mean, I just did it just by creating dummy users to take up those spots, but you could also do it within your model and just say, don't allow people to take these subdomains. But however you want to do it, I would recommend reserving some of those subdomains for yourself before everyone takes them. No, because the way that we're pulling the subdomain is if you do request.subdomains, it'll actually feed you an array of the different subdomains, and we're just pulling the first one. So if you did www.accountdomain, it would try to use www as what it's using to authenticate. The other way around, if you used your account domain dot whatever you want and dot forever and then outlandish at the end, it's only going to use the first one, and it would actually work. And the main reason why I know that is that happened, I think it was this morning actually. Someone sent me an email and they were using some weird login URL that was still working. And I realized it was working because we're only pulling the first subdomain, and they were using the proper subdomain there, and they just had a bunch of other stuff in between. Okay, so what we have here is the first thing that we do in the case statement when those are the standard domain names that we have that we've reserved and people can use subdomains on. So all we're doing is we're just grabbing, if they're using that as their URL to access the landing page, we're just grabbing the subdomain from that and trying to find the campaign that is both supposed to be using a subdomain and has that as the subdomain. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're assuming they're using a custom domain. If they're using a custom domain, we're taking not just the subdomain to find the campaign, we're taking the entire domain as the campaign and using that to find it. So we actually have an account has, there's really 4 fields that are relevant here. There's the domain, subdomain, custom domain, and then type, whether it's supposed to be using a subdomain or a domain. And then, like I said, throughout that whole find process, if it doesn't find a campaign through any of those methods, it kicks them back out to our product site. So essentially, the only weird thing that does, and you get into a situation when you start using your server for other things, is anything you direct to the server. The way we have our virtual host file set up is our Outlandish application is first, and then because the way Lighty works is bottom up or the bottom overwrites what's higher, however you want to look at it. But if anything below Outlandish, if it has any of those domain names, Lighty will direct to those applications. Anything that doesn't match below Outlandish will then go to Outlandish. So if you take a domain name and you direct it to our application, but you're not in the system, then you just gave us another domain name that points to our product site. So sometimes, when we're setting up new sites on the server and we haven't completely set it up, or if something ends up being wrong with the vhost file, it'll do that, where instead of showing like a not found or something like that, it'll end up going through the application and then kick back out to our product site. But that's just kind of one of the things that we deal with by sharing that server with other applications. Questions? The way that we tell people to do it is just to do a CNAME record on their domain. And if they want to wildcard it, like if they have a domain name for all their landing pages, let's say they want to create 10, rather than doing a CNAME record for every single one, if they just wildcard it and point that to us, then they can just set them up and they'll be ready. People have asked in the past, if they don't have a DNS server that they can control, we'll take over it and we'll just tell them to go into like register.com and use our DNS servers and I can do it. But our preference is really not to manage the DNS. I'd rather them just point to us and not have to deal with that extra layer of complexity. Yeah, that's why if they really want to, they can do it per subdomain. They don't have to wildcard it. For some people that want to create multiple domain names and don't want to do a DNS entry for each subdomain, then I would recommend they wildcard it. But it's really up to them. As long as what they're using points to our servers, that's all I really care about. Any other questions? Do I have anything else left? What's next? Oh, okay, so I wanted to do this because chances are, I mean, I may be up here again talking about one of our new escapades or whatever. One of the really great things about having a commercial application like this and getting it out there is once the money starts coming in, it gives you a really good excuse to start trying all these cool things, and you don't feel like you're wasting time because your time is being funded. You're not doing something for free. So we've had an opportunity to really explore some cool things out there. We got to play with the dynamic subdomains or some other cool stuff in the application that we got to try out that we probably wouldn't have been able to justify the time had it not been a application that we were actually getting people to pay for. So some of the things that we are planning on in the future, we've been doing a lot of research into RESTful stuff. I know Simply RESTful just got put into Core, so that'll be interesting to take a look at. We're going to need some API functionality for both ourselves as well as some of our resellers, some larger companies that are looking to resell our product. We want to give them access to some data that they can't get through the interface. We'd rather just give it to them in an API. We're going to allow some private labeling functionality for people that want to have a large account with many campaigns and actually give people within their account access to specific campaigns. An example of this that's specific to our industry is real estate brokers. Usually relatively small offices, maybe real estate broker has 10 agents, and if the broker is very hands-on with their agents advertising, they might have the account themselves. They might set up the multiple campaigns, and then they could individually give certain agents access to certain campaigns. So that's another thing we're going to be working on. And that also goes in with the multiple users per account. Right now, there's one user, one account. But the way that we've set up the models and things like that is already set up to allow to take into consideration that we're going to want to add multiple users per account very, very soon. And actually, this functionality is we're looking to have done by, I would say, end of September, I think is what it's set at right now. So the good thing is, I mean, we had a very, very fast development schedule initially. And even though it was fast, it wasn't too bad. It was pretty comfortable. And even though after going to the show, we had a ton of new ideas and a ton of new requests, we're making a conscious effort to try to slow things down and not constantly be operating at 100%. I mean, you just can't do it. You tire yourself out. So while we're not necessarily coasting yet, we've gone from maybe 100% to maybe 80 to 90%. So it's a little bit more comfortable. So we got these 3 core things that we're looking to get done by the end of September. Cool. That is it.
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.